Hello, 5P. So, as you can tell from the slide that you are able to see, today we're going to finish our topic of discussion of the Civil War. And if you remember from last week, we really explored people who were involved in the Civil War. Remember Abraham Lincoln, General Grant, Robert E. Lee. We talked about all their roles, and then we also talked about reasons that the Civil War even began. So today we're actually going to talk about some significant battles that happened, some addresses, which are also known as speeches, and just some documents that were signed that were really important during this time period. So this is just a continuation of our previous lesson. So welcome to Civil War Part 2. What to expect today, as I said, the first thing we're going to talk about is battles. And we're going to learn about the most influential battles that occurred. There was tons of battles that had occurred during the Civil War. Unfortunately, because of our time limit, we don't have time to fully explore all of these or really get down to the nitty-gritty about who was where and how this was all occurring. We're going to just brush over these topics again because of our time limit. But we're definitely going to talk about battles. We're also going to talk about Gettysburg. I'm not sure how many of you have ever been to Gettysburg, but if you haven't, it's definitely something to check out because it's not far from where you live in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So Gettysburg was a place of a battle, and we're going to talk about what occurred there and why it was influential. We're also going to talk about something called the Gettysburg Address. And the Gettysburg Address was a speech made by President Lincoln. So you're actually going to get to hear that speech and learn why it was important. And finally, number 4 on our list, we're going to talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. And that's a big word, but we're really going to get to explore what it is and why it was impactful for actually the civil rights movement of later years. So let's get started. First and foremost, of course, we still have our key terms and essential questions. So we have, remember, the Union Army, which would have been our northern states. We have the Confederate Army. We have the territory, which is just a portion of land that was not technically belonging to either the Union nor the Confederacy, but was an established place nonetheless. Allegiance, remember, means loyalty. We talked about generals, president, civil rights, slavery, the term emancipation, casualties, and address. We're going to talk about all of these during today. And just some questions to think about as we go through this lesson was, how did the battles of the Civil War really affect the Union? And how did the battles of the Civil War affect the Confederate States of America? Because remember, both sides are going to be impacted by all of these battles of the Civil War. And finally, how did the Emancipation Proclamation aid in the freedom of enslaved peoples? So let's get started. First and foremost, let's talk about battles that occurred during the Civil War. Our first battle that we're going to talk about is the first Battle of Bull Run. It kind of goes hand in hand. This battle was also known as the Battle of Manassas. And most of these battles you're going to realize have multiple names because they were kind of giving a generic name, such as the Battle of Bull Run, which was based upon a stream, but is also near Manassas Junction, Virginia. So that's where the term Battle of Manassas comes to. So all of these battles were named based off places where they occurred. So the first Battle of Bull Run, also known as the Battle of Manassas, happened July 21st, 1861. And remember, 1861 is when the Civil War had started. So this is our first major land battle that occurred of the Civil War, which is why it is incredibly significant. This actually battle that took place in Manassas Junction, Virginia, had a Confederate Army victory. So the Confederate States of America had actually won this battle. And it was influential in terms of the Union thought that this was going to be a really easy war, that they would easily be able to crush the resistance by the Confederate States of America and have an easy victory. But since the Confederacy won this battle, the first Battle of Bull Run, it made them realize the war was not going to be as easily won as they thought. And this was most definitely the case because both sides began to realize that this war was going to come at a large cost. And by cost, not only did it mean resources on the environment and actual money, but also cost of human lives. The Civil War unfortunately claimed a lot of Americans' lives during this time period, which we will quickly see in other battles by the sheer numbers of people that were hurt or unfortunately killed during this time frame. As you can see here, we do have an image on the right. That's actually an old house that is still there at the First Battle of Bull Run. And as you might have noticed, as you explored the battlefield last week or last Wednesday, a lot of them were big open areas and fields basically. And that's where lots of the battles occurred because it was an equal playing field and it was allowed for hand-to-hand combat as well as some artillery fire from like cannons. So all of this is really important, but that is actually a picture of what the First Battle of Bull Run looks like today if you would visit the site. All right, so we had the First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the Battle of Manassas. Our second battle of today is the Battle of Shiloh. And the Battle of Shiloh is also known as the Battle of Pittsburgh-Landon. No, this does not occur in Pennsylvania. Rather, this occurred actually in Pennsylvania. And this occurred from April 6th to 7th, so it was 2 days truly, in 1862. So this was a little bit later, almost a year later from the first battle of Bull Run. And in this battle, the Confederate Army launched a surprise attack. That should say attack. I apologize, not attack on the Union Army. And what was significant about this was there was more than 23,000 casualties. And casualties could mean injuries, people going missing, or unfortunately deaths, but 23,000 in a 2-day span. And the number of casualties that occurred was shocking to both the Union and Confederate Army because neither had thought that they would lose this great of amount of people in such a short time span. 23,000 is a lot to experience. It is practically, if you split it up into days, if you round it up to 24,000, it's practically 12,000 people per day that were either injured, missing, or killed, which is a large number. And the funny thing about the Battle of Shiloh is just the fact that they weren't aware of how great of a cost this would be. The Union Army actually won this victory, and it was a Union victory for Shiloh at the Battle of Shiloh, or the Battle of Pittsburgh-Landon. As you can see again from the picture, it's just a big open field out in Tennessee. So one of our more southern state battles. All right. Our third battle that we are going to explore today is the Battle of Antietam. And this is also known as the Battle of Sharpsburg. And this occurred September 17th, 1862, so a little bit after the Battle of Shiloh. And it occurred at Antietam Creek near Sharpsburg, Maryland. So again, you can see this is where the names of the battle comes from. Antietam comes from the creek, and it's called the Battle of Antietam, or also known as the Battle of Sharpsburg. Sharpsburg comes from Sharpsburg, Maryland. Definitely named after the places. And this was known as the deadliest one-day battle in all American history, even to this day, because in 12 hours, there were 23,000 casualties, and an estimated 3,650 individuals had lost their lives in a 12-hour period. So basically, if you, in a little bit more than a school day, we had lost, there had been 23,000 people injured or killed, which is incredible. And it was the last, this battle was Lee's attempt to invade the North, but the Union Army had managed to withhold him. So it was a Union Army victory. The general in charge was General McClellan. He was actually removed because Lincoln was so upset with the number of casualties and thought that he did not do a good job of leading the men. And as you can see from this image, you'll notice that there's almost two sides, and there's almost like a divot in between here, and it's basically like a trench in a way. But this trench was actually covered, unfortunately, with bodies because there was that many dead, and it became known as Bloody Lane because of that. So it definitely was a large amount of casualties that had occurred. A lot of people were hurt and injured during this. All right. Another battle that we're going to talk about is the Siege of Vicksburg. And siege just means like the taking over of Vicksburg. It did occur in Vicksburg, Mississippi. So definitely our most southern battle that we're going to talk about today. And it occurred May 18th, 1863 through July 4th, 1863. So what do you most notice about that? I wish I could talk to you through this, but maybe what you might have noticed is that's a long time. May 18th through July 4th of the same year. That's 47 days. So this siege or battle took 47 days to finally gain control of Vicksburg. But it was definitely something that the Union was thought worth fighting for. So the siege gave control of the Mississippi River to the Union. And the Mississippi River was important because it was a critical supply line and an access of resources to the Confederate States of America. See, the Confederate States of America, one of their biggest factors that led to their demise in terms of an army and allowed them to be weak and give victory for the Union was they lacked resources because most of the battles of the Civil War were fought in the South, and all these farmers' crops and such were being taken over in terms of being fought at in the battlegrounds, or they were being used by the armies, or just used by the opposite army. The Union would come through, burn, whatever it might be. And so they really lacked resources. So the Mississippi River would carry up, would have different supplies come up the river. And this was part of the Union's plan to cut off outside trade to the Confederate Army. They knew if they cut off that supply of resources, that the Confederate Army would just get weaker. And it most definitely had worked when they finally won. And the siege of Vicksburg allowed the Union eventually won, and the Union victory aided in the turning point of the war. It was one of the things that led to the Union victory of the Civil War. All right, so that was the Battle of Gettysburg. Remember, we talked about the first Battle of Bull Run. That was the battle which was the first major land battle of the Civil War. 2, we talked about the Battle of Shiloh. That was a surprise attack on the Union Army, and there was a large number of casualties, but resulted in Union victory. The Battle of Antietam is known as the deadliest one-day battle in all-American history. Definitely one of the most brutal battles that we have ever seen. The Siege of Vicksburg, remember, was a 47-day siege in which the Union Army finally gained control of Vicksburg, which was a town, and over the Mississippi River, and took resources from the Confederate States of America and allowed the Union to be aided in victory. Now, the second thing we're going to talk about, remember, is the Battle of Gettysburg. And Gettysburg is very close to us in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. That's the name. The Battle of Gettysburg took place on July 1st through the 3rd, 1863. As you can see, this is during the same time that the Siege of Vicksburg is occurring. Both of these, the Siege of Vicksburg and Gettysburg battle, were both very, very important in terms of aiding in their success of victory. So in terms of the Union's success of victory. So this occurred in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, again, July 1st through the 3rd, 1863. And it is considered the most important battle of the Civil War. And that is solely because General Lee was leading the Confederate States of America up to the north in hopes of invading them. And it was his final try to really get up to the north. And it stopped that invasion because the Union had victory at Gettysburg. So there were 23,000 Union casualties and 28,000 Confederate casualties during these 3 days that it occurred. And 28,000 Confederate casualties was 1/3 of General Lee's army. So he was very greatly injured in terms of resources of individuals during this Battle of Gettysburg. And the Battle of Gettysburg did have a lot of casualties. Remember, casualties means people got missing, injuries, or even death. As I said, the Union did win, and this was a major turning point of the war because it turned General Robert E. Lee back down towards the south. At the same time, Vicksburg was being taken over, and their supplies were being cut off. So it really aided in the demise of the Confederate States of America. And this image that we have over here actually is at Gettysburg, and this is the Pennsylvania Memorial for all of the soldiers that fought. So most memorials only take into consideration the people of high rank, so such as generals or lieutenants. What's interesting about the Pennsylvania Monument is that it includes every soldier ever who fought at Gettysburg that was from Pennsylvania on there, regardless of their class or station. So the Pennsylvania Monument is unique in that way. So if you ever get a chance to visit Gettysburg, and you actually are going to get to visit it virtually, because I know we were hoping to have gone on a trip, but COVID did not allow us to. So I wanted to bring the battlefield to you. So the next link that you will click on after you're done watching this video will allow you to explore all of those videos and do 360 turns and get to experience them yourself. So I hope you guys enjoy that. I was really put a lot of time and effort into finding that for you guys. All right, our third thing we're going to talk about quickly is the Gettysburg Address. And the Gettysburg Address was a speech that occurred November 19th, 1863 in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And it was a dedication ceremony that occurred for the National Cemetery of Gettysburg. For those of you who don't know, Gettysburg is a national cemetery. There's the cemetery that occurs, and it was consecrated by very influential people such as President Lincoln. But Lincoln was not the keynote speaker. There was actually a different man who was the keynote speaker, and he spoke for 2 whole hours. But Lincoln's turn was after the keynote speakers, and he gets up, and he's known for opening a folded piece of paper from his pocket that he wrote on the train. He legit wrote his speech on the train down, and he speaks for like 5 minutes max. And it ended up being one of the greatest speeches that they will ever remember. And at first, people really criticized him because they're like, it couldn't be that short. Like, this is a big deal. But the power of his words was unbelievable. And Lincoln really invoked principles of human equality in his speech. He connected the sacrifices of the Civil War with the desire to have a new birth of freedom. So he gave them a reason to continue this journey of the war and to not lose faith. And he also did this to preserve the Union and the ideal of self-government. So it was very, very important. And I'm actually going to have you guys watch this with me. That way you don't have to watch it on your own. So if we just click this video, we'll get started.
The President of the United States!
Resistance to the war was growing. Mr. Lincoln needed to reinvigorate the people, to explain to them, and perhaps himself, why this endless plague of war must continue.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, We cannot dedicate. We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
It's far too short. You have nothing else to say?
Silly, flat, and dish.
So as you can see, Lincoln's speech was not very long, yet it was very poignant in terms of it was very piercing, and it really allowed the people to get some closure and give them a reason to continue in the war, because it was getting very long and costly for both sides, especially the Union, in which, remember, President Lincoln was in charge of. Okay, so our very last thing that we're going to talk about today is Emancipation Proclamation. So what is Emancipation Proclamation? So emancipation means the freeing, making liberty, the freedom of liberating someone. And proclamation just means a declaration, making it known. So the Emancipation Proclamation actually was a document, and it was signed January 22nd, 1862. So this would be in the middle of the Civil War. And it declared that as of January 1st of 1863, all enslaved people in the South shall be thenceforward and forever free. So he was releasing all of the enslaved individuals in the South, that they would be free, which was a huge step for this time period. However, it only applied to the enslaved people of the South. So if there was anyone, and I should say by South, only applied to the states that were part of the Confederate States of America, only those enslaved people would be free. So if there was a state like such as West Virginia, remember, that was technically part of the Union but still had enslaved people, they would not be free. This would only be the Confederate States. So say Virginia or Maryland, would they then be freed? And it turned the Civil War, though, into a war that not only to preserve the Union, but also to end slavery. So it gave another new purpose for the Civil War, for people to continue to fight. So the only catch too was that the Union had to win for these slaves or enslaved people to be free. So if the Union did not win, they would not be free. And remember, this was only enslaved people that were part of the Confederate States of America, those states. Anyone else would not be free. They would still be held in bondage. And unfortunately, while yes, it gave new reason and purpose, and a good purpose at that, of course, to end slavery, this was really a ploy to get more people to fight for the Union. Because African-American people at this time, the enslaved people, would join the Union to fight for them if they were guaranteed their freedom. So that's what the Emancipation Proclamation was. And the harsh truth is that Lincoln's real concern was about saving the Union compared to actually the idea of slavery. He did think that all men were created equal, but that was not his sole concern or reason for writing the Emancipation Proclamation. It was to gain soldiers and give purpose for his soldiers to continue to fight. And there's proof in this quote by Lincoln. If I could save the Union without freeing any slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. So as you can see from this quote, it was not really about the lives of the enslaved people that he cared about. While he did care about that to a point, his real and true motive was to preserve the Union. He wanted the Union to continue and for the United States of America to continue to grow, come together as one. And eventually, obviously, that did occur. Unfortunately, President Lincoln, as many of you know, ended up meeting his demise at the end of the war as he was shot and assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. And mostly was that the reason because of that was his partaking of the freedom of slaves, the idea of freeing enslaved people. And while the Emancipation Proclamation really did just get people to join up into the Army more, it did serve, though, as a starting point for the modern day civil rights movement in terms of that enslaved people would become free, that slavery would disappear, and that eventually, as President Lincoln said, that all men are created equal. This idea that one day any person of color would have the same opportunities as a person who is white. And the Emancipation Proclamation definitely led to that. So while I know we are not together in person, if you have any questions about what you learned today, definitely feel free to reach out to me through Seesaw. I will be on there. I'm watching for any questions. And the next two things you're going to get to do is one, explore the Gettysburg battlefield. You're going to click on the link that's on the next section and go through that and have an activity, and then answer a couple other questions then at the end as well. So again, if you have any questions, make sure you reach out to me on Seesaw, and I will definitely be there to help you. So I hope you have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow, 5 p.m.